this talk. It reminded me a lot of another European project in which I'm slightly involved, which is called the European Open Science Cloud. And there are many commonalities and maybe bridges to create between these projects. So just wanted to mention it. Okay, last but not least, we have Lois Evans, who is, according to a website, so I don't know, a doctoral candidate under the supervision of Luciana Duranti at the University of British Columbia. According to LinkedIn, Lois Evans is a records and information manager with expertise in guiding organizations through electronic transformations, with proven ability to leverage business process analysis and develop document solutions that overcome challenges, support change, and create workflow efficiencies. Her research interests include social networks, digital diplomatics, auto-classification, machine learning, and information security. Lois, please.
Okay, great. Thank you for the introduction, and it's a real honor to be here. Thanks very much to the organizers and also to Interpairs. It's a really exciting time for me to be here in Jerusalem, and I want to thank everyone for this incredible opportunity. So I'm speaking today on behalf of the team, which is led by Dr. Patricia Franks of San Jose State University, California, and her colleague, Dr. Michelle Chan, who is a data analyst there. The project is included in the Social Societal Issues Cross-Domain, of which Dr. Franks is the chair. And what will be represented here are the Canadian and American perspectives. So over the next 20 minutes, I'll discuss the study, the research context, the results, and their implications. So our study began in 2014, which now seems like such a simpler time. WikiLeaks and the Snowden disclosure had significant impact on the levels of trust in government, which according to the Edelman Trust Barometer fell to 42% in the US and 54% in Canada following these activities. However, the levels of trust among the informed public were higher, at 49% in the US and 60% in Canada. And trust in social media was growing, and there were residual expectations that social media would be a transformative source for democracy, based primarily on the Obama election campaigns and the Arab Spring. So our attention focused on local government, where social media was adopted at amazing rates. An estimated 86% of US cities had adopted social media by 2010 and 93.5% by 2012. So our study followed Dr. Frank's 2010 research into social media use by US federal agencies, and this study resulted in 40 recommendations. Our new study would focus on social media use in local government, which is known for providing services that directly impact citizens. So tying our research to the Interpairs Trust Project, we focused on two questions. Can social media be used by local governments to increase citizen trust? And what can we learn about the administration of social media that results in an increase in trust? So our research design was explanatory and process-oriented. There were two overlapping phases. Since trust involves a relationship between two parties, we first looked at the government perspective using a qualitative approach with interviews and content analysis. In the second phase, we took a quantitative approach and collected Twitter data and ran sentiment analysis. We also planned to conduct an online citizen survey, but were unsuccessful. But I'll talk about that anyways. So our sample selection is showing here. We decided to investigate 10 American and 10 Canadian cities that had existing successful social media programs. We looked for demographic and geographic diversity and ended up with the 20 cities listed here. So after we selected them on the basis of one Facebook account for the city, They have to also have a Twitter account for the city, the mayor, and the police, and one other social media account. And in 2014, that was enough to go from 40 possible cities down to this 20. But after we selected them, we found that over half were capital cities, and almost all were among the top 50 cities in the US by population, or the top 25 in Canada. So they were kind of an aspirational sample. As archivists and records managers and data scientists, we're always focused on the trustworthiness of records. In our research, we shifted to thinking about how records can support trust in government, and noting that trust is always based to some degree on information. So, however, there are many theories of trust, how trust works, and we examined 4 of these in a literature review and a short paper on social media and trust in law enforcement that you can find on the Interpares Trust site. So what we looked at were theories involving trust as a component of social capital. Trust is found in social relationships, trust based on operational choices, and trust based on leveraging components to achieve maximum profit. So what we can say out of this is that trust is largely viewed as a form of social capital, which along with obligations, expectations of reciprocity, and knowledge provision are examples. Social capital refers to the resources embedded in one's social networks that can be accessed for collective action. So what researchers are most interested in learning is whether social media impacts social capital in a way that results in participation or action. So in our study, these themes of trust began to coalesce around, I'll just back up. In thinking about how trust is created, researchers talk about trust as a progression, as Dr. Durante mentioned. So from personality-based to societal tie to emergent through mutual relationships, and as a feature of a community as a whole. They also talk about process-based trust. People trust institutions because the institutions provide something to them. So in our study, these themes of trust began to coalesce around open government. Shown here is the Interpares definition, which says that trust is built through access to information, which promotes transparency, accountability, engagement, and participation. And because we're information managers or records managers and archivists, we put information in the center. But public administration scholars might consider this sort of a ground level view of open government. The next level version would see open government as involving citizens in decisions that affect them in their daily lives. And so as Dr. Shepard mentioned, the way open government is operationalized in Canada is largely determined at the national level. This Canadian vision reflects 3 streams: open information, which includes freedom of information, protection of privacy, and proactive release; open data, which is provided through data portals and data sets; and open dialogue, which includes social media. Through these streams, transparency, accountability, and participation are promoted. And it's interesting to note at the local level in the United States, the focus is solely on open data and accountability. In fact, one of our participants said, open data is open government. So we found that the literature differentiated between citizen engagement, which refers to people being involved in their community, and public participation, which refers to people being involved in the political process. So this difference is illustrated on the City of Surrey's website. I mention this because a significant amount of research has been done on social media and participation. There are even 2 meta-analytical reviews which covered 36 and 22 studies respectively, so 56 studies on social media and participation. Both reviews found that the relationship between social media use and participation is clearly positive, but not necessarily statistically significant, and that the question of causation remains unanswered. So not really sure if social media use results in increased participation or the reverse. So from here, we'll now turn to our research results. So in our case studies, as we mentioned, the case studies focus on these 10 US and 10 Canadian cities. We contacted all 20, and we interviewed the social media staff at 17 of the 20. We also completed content analysis of social media and record policies, guidelines, terms of use, web pages, social media account home pages, and reports, with or without their permission, for the 3 that weren't interviewed. So our findings are presented in the article Voices in the Cloud, which was published in the Records Management Journal in January. So this slide I'll take some time going through, and I'll go through each of these points here. So we found that the administration of social media programs was quite similar in the US and Canada. In general, social media was adopted between 2008 and 2010, mainly in response to an emergency or major weather event in Canada, and at the request of council or in the regular course of business in the US. Adoption was rapid, with business units adopting various platforms and launching many accounts. The range in number for each city was a low of 15 up to 130 social media accounts in a city. Social media was administered by the communication departments, who considered it secondary and auxiliary to the websites, which was the place where the cities engaged citizens and where most city business was conducted. The social media administration structure was described as hub and spoke, with communications directly managing the main city accounts and controlling which platforms could be adopted by business units, whether or not they could have accounts, and which staff could have administrative rights. However, neither the council members nor the police accounts, neither the council member accounts or the police accounts were considered to be within the communications area of responsibility. Communications control over social media was enshrined in social media policies, where high concern over the city's reputations and possible liability was demonstrated. The policies included directives to employees around appropriate use, consistent messaging, and confidentiality and privacy. There were also terms of use directed at social media audiences, and these focused on appropriate content, tone, and language, and stating that contravening material could be removed. In terms of use, the focus was on providing information about an initiative and events in a one-way broadcast fashion. Two-way use was largely limited to issue management and responding to the odd service request. In the US, the social media teams only monitored the main city accounts, but in Canada, they looked to monitor everything. In both countries, the monitoring was intended to identify and remove inappropriate content, which they did at a rate of about 2 or 3 posts per account per month. In Canada, users were occasionally banned if they consistently broke the terms of use. And then in terms of reporting, measurement was surprisingly sporadic. In the US, only one city reported regularly providing materials to senior teams, and in Canada, about half produced reports at varying intervals. So the team said this was due to a lack of staff resources, a lack of funding for tools, and a lack of expertise. And the teams didn't know much about their audiences between some basic demographics at best. So in talking a little bit about their attitudes around trust, the social media teams thought about trust mostly in terms of their own trustworthiness as agents of the cities. They emphasized that the city accounts were the official voice of the city, and this was especially true around contentious issues or in times of emergency. They saw social media as providing an advantage over traditional media, as there was no filtering by the press or third parties, and they could speak directly to their audiences. They did not appear to give much thought to the social media platform's role in how their messaging was distributed. They often emphasized that they were nonpartisan and that they were at arm's length from the elected officials who had their own accounts and their own staff. And they emphasized their own professionalism, that they provided factual content, they corrected and updated content in a timely manner, and that they were very careful about removing or responding to negative feedback. So given their concerns around reputation, they were surprisingly risk tolerant. They told us about a myriad of issues, including parody accounts, hacked accounts, including one of the mayor's accounts was hacked, viruses that they introduced through analytical software, and major mistakes around information or confidential information made by employees. But they said, well, we focus on prevention, and then if something goes wrong, we fix it. And then looking at the social media team's view towards social media as records, this tolerance that they had towards risk seemed to extend to their treatment of social media as records. Although they knew social media content included records subject to state laws and to records management requirements, and although most had responded to FIPA or legal requests involving social media, only a small minority had formalized procedures for managing social media as records. Instead, they were comfortable relying on whatever facilities were provided by the social media platforms. And even in saying this, they noted it was often difficult to provide records after the fact, and that business units making requests were advised to do so as early as possible. So that sort of summarized what we found from the first phase of the research. In the second phase, we moved to sentiment analysis. And as you probably already know, sentiment analysis is a technique that uses natural language processing, statistics, or machine learning methods to extract or characterize the sentiment content of a text unit in terms of things like feelings, attitudes, emotions, or opinions. And the use of sentiment analysis in our study is notable because it's based on the actual content when you're doing sentiment analysis, and this extends previous work, which is almost uniformly based on self-reported surveys or panels. So we're actually looking at content, which is considered significant. So for our study, we collected Twitter data for all 20 cities for 3 accounts, the city, the mayor, and the police. So that's a total of 60 accounts in total. And we collected the data retrospectively for a 20-month period. That started on January 1st, 2013, and extended to August 25th, 2014, so 20 months. And it's a bit tricky to do retrospective collection. Our approach is described in our paper, A Comparative Study of Sentiment Analysis Techniques, which appeared in the Journal of Digital Information Management. But essentially, we captured the data. We cleaned it, we ran it through processing, different types of processing, and then we finalized the analysis using 3 different tools. And the paper that was produced was actually primarily about the process and about the comparison of the tools and about the reproducibility of the findings. So just to give an example, this is a sentiment analysis chart. It's a visual representation of the sentiment data for one of the 60 accounts. The green line is the neutral sentiment, the blue is the positive, and the red is the negative. And so positive sentiment is associated with emotions such as trust and awe, while negative is associated with emotions like anger or sadness. So in this result, this is the city of Calgary, and we found that you could actually go into the results and you could look and see if there was a peak or jump, like you can see these 3. Okay, but sort of these ones lining up there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So, just to be very specific, so I think, now I've got problems with my glasses versus, so I think that's 2006. So this line up here, so this is Calgary, and on that time in June, they had a significant flood, really significant, and that was around the time that the flood crested. And so you can see actually that the city response is considered, at least there's something good going on. It's not a huge dip downwards, a little blip up. So we found that you could actually dig down by looking at these charts. So now looking at sort of more of the data as a whole, you can't tell too much about that, but what I wanted to point out is just sort of how much content is actually produced by the cities and also by their audiences. So in the red bar, you can see that there's literally thousands of, each line is an account. You can see there's thousands of tweets first on the left, on the part of the city, and then also in response by their audiences. So this may explain some of the ambivalence expressed by the teams with respect to social media's records, because you can think this is just one account, some of them have 130, and this is just for 20 months. So they are really stacking up all those tweets. And in terms of our findings, we found that they've conferred with previous findings that there is a positive, significant relationship between social media use and positive sentiment. So overall, there's a positive relationship between social media use and the response of the audiences. However, in terms of administration, you can see the other things we could look at were things like the longevity of accounts, how long the account was open, and the number of followers, the number of city tweets, tweets by the cities, and the number of tweets by the audience. And we actually found there were no significant relationships in these, no significant correlation in these elements. In fact, there was an insignificant negative relationship between the longevity of accounts and positive sentiment, and sort of weak, insignificant positive relationships between the other three: the number of followers, the number of city tweets, and the number of audience tweets. However, there was a significant difference in positive sentiment by account type. The mayor's accounts had a mean of 34% positive sentiment, the cities had 28%, and the police had 23%, which leads us to suggest that the audience may be expressing different levels of trust for the different roles. Some of the social media teams did tell us that the audiences were aware of the operational nature of the city accounts and that they directed their more political accounts to council members. And beyond this, we observed different uses by the mayors, who of course are elected and are using their, tend to use their accounts for campaigning, and the police, who are responding to incidents and emergencies. So moving to the survey, very briefly, we did plan to partner with 4 of the sample cities to run an online questionnaire. The idea was the cities would run notices about the survey with a link, and then we would run the survey. And when we first talked to all the 17 cities, this seemed like a good idea. Everyone seemed to think it was a good idea. I think they thought it was a good idea if they weren't involved, maybe. So unfortunately, we were not able to get any of the U.S. cities we approached to participate, and most of them said we're too busy with other initiatives. But the Canadians were sort of a little more open about their reasons. We actually only spoke to 2 Canadian cities, and one agreed to participate after quite a bit of discussion. So the real concerns were around the questions, which included responding to who do you trust more, the mayor or the police chief. So you can see the problem there. But why we were asking those questions, because we wanted to reference back to the Edelman Barometer Trust. And so those were important questions in determining different rates of trust. And so that was one of the main ones, was this performance rating of elected officials and getting on board with that. But more importantly, the real concern was that the social media audiences were not representative of their populations as a whole. And so they were saying, well, we don't know much about the demographics, we don't know much about the audience. We said, well, we have those questions on the questionnaire. But then they said, well, but how does that compare to what's going on in the city as a whole? That's just people in sentiment analysis, and that's a sliver of a slice. And it just depends on the day of the week who's looking at our stuff. Yeah, I just covered that. So in fact, it turned out that this problem of non-representativeness, along with third-party control of their platforms, was one of the reasons the cities did not use social media for measuring engagement or participation. So this piece around them not doing reporting, why weren't they doing reporting? Because it doesn't really matter. It's a lot of work, it's hard to do, we don't have the tools, we don't have the expertise, and in the end, it doesn't tell us anything about the population as a whole. It's not representative. So what they did instead is they began to launch their own consultation portals where citizens could sign up as forum members and provide feedback through surveys, discussions, and other online mechanisms. So in fact, the cities seem to have responded to third-party platform dominance by not playing the game, by using social media to broadcast information about their initiatives and creating their own forums to promote public participation and citizen engagement. So from what we know, these forums do provide a real level of participation, where audience feedback is actually collected, reported, and published in the context of real decisions made by government. And you can see a list of reports here. And interestingly, they're all about community planning, which is traditionally a place where the public is very much engaged at the local government level. The other piece is participatory budgeting. And so that's another piece. So these forums appear to be gaining popularity in Canada. So when we started, there were maybe 2 of these forums, and now there's about 5 out of the 10 cities. And in the US, they're not as widely used, but there is some evidence of ad hoc use where they have added in consultation pieces to projects. So in conclusion, in response to our first question, we believe that our findings support that there is a positive relationship between social media use and citizen trust in government. But in response to our second research question as to what we can learn about the administration of social media that results in an increase in trust, we found that it does not account longevity, the number of followers, the number of tweets, or the number of audience tweets that determines positive sentiment, but who is doing the tweeting and likely what they're tweeting about. So we can state these findings, restate these findings in terms of social media and trust, as we've done, or social media and open government, as I've done here. But I'll conclude here. I think my time's come to an end, so thank you very much.